Welcome to Estate Planning with Bernard Law.
Hello and welcome to Estate Planning with Bernard Law. Daniel Bernard helps families in New York and Florida protect their future through thoughtful estate planning, including wills, trusts, probate avoidance, and long-term asset protection. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and of course, I am here with Daniel Bernard. Daniel, welcome back.
It's great to be back.
So last episode, you mentioned something very briefly. You mentioned something about snowbirds. What exactly is a snowbird, and why are we talking about snowbirds today?
Sure. So snowbirds are people that divide their time typically between a cold weather state and a warm weather state. In my case, the snowbirds I help out are we have a lot of snowbirds in New York that divide their time between New York and Florida. So I'm admitted to practice in New York. I'm admitted to practice in Florida. And basically, since a few years after I started practicing in this area, I realized I'm coming across more and more people that are dividing their time between two states. And I'm noticing the complications this causes in their estate plan. So I've actually written the book on estate planning for snowbirds, available on Amazon, but don't buy it on Amazon. Just come to my office. I'll give it to you for free. But snowbirds unwittingly are causing a little bit of complication to their estates. And it's I like to put this information out. So I wrote the book, written a bunch of articles on it. I've done some seminars on estate planning for snowbirds for their specific snowbird issues, or the issues that being a snowbird creates in their estate.
So look, I'm going to ask the obvious question. If you split time between two states, which one controls your estate when you pass?
That's a great question. So although you can have multiple, houses, you can only have one home, and your home is where you are domiciled. And domicile is a legal term, and that there's no agreed upon direct definition, but domicile is essentially your home. It's where you intend to return to when you are away. So, for example, when I was in high school, I was a foreign exchange student to Brazil. I lived in Brazil for 10 months. I was never domiciled in Brazil. I was always still domiciled in New York State because I intended to return to New York State afterwards. So snowbirds, even though they may have a house in New York, house in Florida, they might even have a house in another state as well. They can only have one domicile, and that domicile is the state that considers you a resident. And that's typically where you would have your driver's license that designates where your domicile is.
So in your example, then, between New York and Florida, is it pretty much mostly it's New York where most people are domiciled?
Most people remain domiciled in New York. The people that decide to become domiciled in Florida, it's typically for one reason and one reason alone, and that is because New York has a state level income tax, and Florida does not have a state level income tax. Same for estate tax. New York State imposes an estate tax. Florida does not impose an estate tax. Okay. So for our higher net worth New York estates, where these people may become subject to New York State estate tax, they will sometimes become Florida residents to avoid that New York level estate tax. That in and of itself is a podcast episode.
Yeah. And a motivating factor, no doubt about it. Are there other taxes too, or is it mainly just the estate tax and income?
The income and the estate are the big savers for people that move New York to Florida. Okay. Typically, our other taxes pretty much remain the same.
That humidity, though, I just don't know. I don't know if I could do it. So how does someone legally prove Florida residency then if they want to be domiciled there?
Oh, well, Florida is happy to take you as a resident. Florida, if you will allow you to turn your New York State driver's license in, and now you have a Florida driver's license. And they have every county you can file what's called a declaration of domicile, where you're saying, I'm now domiciled in whatever, pick your county, Pinellas County, Florida. I'm now domiciled in Miami-Dade County, Florida. And Florida's happy to have you. It's New York that isn't so happy sometimes to see you leave. And New York doesn't always give up give you up as a resident. New York still wants you to be a resident, not for voting, but just for paying taxes. New York State, even if you're a part-time resident, they will still come after you and say, no, you should pay. You're still a resident here. You're spending time here. You still have a house here. We still want the taxes on all of your income. So it's easy to become a Florida resident. It's just not as easy to no longer be a New York State resident.
They're basically just saying, well, you live here half the year, so you have to be considered a New York resident.
Oh, so New York has two ways that they'll call you still a New York resident. One is they'll say you're still domiciled in New York. So they'll say New York is still your home. We don't care that you spent 10 months last year in Brazil or Pennsylvania or Florida. New York is still your home. And if they can't prove that New York is still your home, then they'll say, well, you spent too much time here. So we have what are called statutory residents, where they'll say, no, we agree, you're not a New York State resident, but you spent 183 days or more in New York State in the calendar year. So we expect you to pay tax as if you're a resident. And that's where a lot of people... That's where they drag a lot of people in, is because a lot of times especially our high net worth snowbirds, they don't need to sell their New York house to move to Florida. And they want to maintain that primary residence that they raise their kids in. They still have friends in New York. They still plan on coming back to New York, but it's now New York is the vacation rather than Florida's the vacation.
Mm-hmm.
So when they come back to New York, rather than stay in a hotel or Airbnb, why don't I just keep my house that I'm comfortable in and I can stay in my home? And that's where people run into the problems, where New York State says, well, you didn't sell your house. Did you really move? And they'll question people. The good news is, and what I want to stress about, New York State certainly gets a lot of money every year from residency audits, but typically it's the higher net worth people. So if you're typically, if you're a New York State employee that has a New York State pension and now you've moved to Florida, as sometimes people feel like that's the law. Like Jerry Seinfeld said, my parents didn't want to move to Florida, but they turned 62, and that's the law. And I feel like I've told that joke more than Jerry Seinfeld has. I put it in my book. I think it sometimes reflects, when you live in New York, how it seems like it is that everyone eventually has to move to Florida. But the good news is, for the vast majority of us, I'll say regular people that move to Florida, New York State leaves us alone. It's really the high net worth people that get roped into these residency audits.
Yeah, the people whose tax money really moves the needle.
Yeah, so if you're a retired police officer and maybe your spouse is a retired teacher and you have a house on Long Island and you buy a condo in Florida, most likely you're not going to be audited. New York State will accept that you're no longer a resident if you try to go that route. But typically for those people, it's tax neutral. It's our higher net worth people that can really save on the taxes.
So if you decide you want to, retire, or if you're retired and you decide you want to have a place in Florida too, is it important to update your estate plan? Or do you not have to technically?
Absolutely. It's very important to update your estate plans. And the reason for that is probate. So if you own a house in New York and you own a house in Florida, your estate needs to be probated in New York and in Florida. So what that means is your family has to do the full probate up here with your will, transfer your New York house, and then they have to do what's called an ancillary probate in Florida, which has the same formalities as the New York probate, same formalities as a regular probate. They just call it ancillary, and that is to then transfer just that Florida house. So, and that's based on, the U.S. Constitution. We have sovereignty between the states. So New York cannot tell Florida, hey, this is how real estate in your state passes, and Florida can't tell New York, this is how real estate in your state passes. So that's why we end up with the probates in multiple states. And there's a really easy way to avoid that. Create a trust, move your houses into that trust, and we can avoid that probate in Florida and likely avoid that probate in New York as well. So I always tell people, if you're snowbirding, let's update that estate plan. Let's make sure our house is in that trust. And let's make sure our kids aren't really upset with us that they're having to do these probates in two states.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
It's a lot. It's a lot of
Right.
money. It's a lot of headaches, and
A lot of work.
it's you have to. A lot of times, I'm licensed to practice in both states, so when people come in, I can do the New York probate and the Florida probate at the same time. But
Uh-huh.
not everyone can do that. So sometimes you end up having to hire two attorneys. Sometimes you do the entire New York probate, and then you find out you have to do the Florida probate, and then you're starting the whole process over again down in Florida. So it can be a real nightmare for the beneficiaries, and it's not a big deal. To me, it's good estate planning anyway to create the trust, and it's essential estate planning for snowbirds.
In our previous episode, we talked about different aspects of estate plans, and you mentioned powers of attorney, medical directives, things like that. Are there different rules for those between Florida and New York?
So if you're a New York State resident and you have you execute your New York healthcare proxy, your New York power of attorney, that is valid in all 50 states.
Okay,
Same for Florida.
that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. But the issue is, in Florida, they're used to seeing the Florida version of the documents. They're used to seeing the Florida healthcare proxy, the Florida power of attorney. The names aren't even the same. In New York, we call it a healthcare proxy. In Florida, they call it a declaration of healthcare surrogate. Power of attorney is the same in every state. Same name, but New York's power of attorney looks a lot different than Florida's. So what I have my snowbirds do is we can only have one will, but we can have you can only have one original of that will, and you can only have one. You can't have a New York will, a Florida will. Only one of them is valid. But you can have a healthcare proxy in New York and a declaration of healthcare surrogate in Florida, as long as you name the same people, which I wouldn't do it if you weren't naming the same people. As long as you name the same people, they're valid in both states. So what I do for all my snowbirds is you have a healthcare proxy, power of attorney, living will for New York, and you have a declaration of healthcare surrogate, a Florida declaration, and a power of attorney for Florida. I tell you, keep your New York stuff in New York, keep your Florida stuff in Florida, and then, God forbid, your family needs to use that healthcare proxy at the hospital. If they're in New York, they'll use the New York version. If they're in Florida, they can use the Florida version. What that does is, although your New York version's acceptable in Florida, they're not used to seeing that, so any hospital, any bank is going to want their general counsel to review your documents and make sure that these are legitimate for the state, and that's going to be time consuming. Not every hospital attorney works at 2:00 in the morning, right? It's probably a 9 to 5 type job. It's probably Monday to Friday type job. So if you need and there's no guarantee they're going to get to that right away, right? So this could delay being able to use that power of attorney, being able to use that healthcare proxy for days or weeks. So I put that together for my clients so they can have seamless. The whole point of estate planning is not having problems. So that's one of the bigger problems we can avoid. So we put that in place for everybody.
So what are the estate documents that you always recommend snowbirds have in place, like that are really, really important?
The trust is the number one, because I really want to avoid that probate in both New York and in Florida. But even if you have a trust in place already, it might be worthwhile to make sure that trust doesn't need to be updated based on the fact that you're going to be spending some time in Florida. Because, for example, Florida has a homestead protection over their primary residences that we don't have in New York. So it's important that your trust has the appropriate homestead language if you become a Florida resident and you want to get homestead over your property. Homestead is essentially creditors cannot take your property from you. Your mortgage company can still foreclose on you, but it's really rock solid creditor protection over their primary residences. A couple examples. The notorious one is O.J. Simpson, right? The Goldman family was able to take almost everything from him. The one thing they couldn't get was his house in Florida because he had a homestead protection over the property. Another one is a lot of people, if you remember the show Punked with Ashton Kutcher, he punked Justin Timberlake, and Justin Timberlake crying, "Oh, we took everything from you," and they said, "We took your house in Florida," and he pops up and he goes, "You can't take my house in Florida. I have a homestead exemption on the property," which to me just shows how valuable that protection is for people in Florida, that it snapped him out of his comatose state and said, no, you can't take that. You can't take that. So that's an example of, if you're moving to Florida, you're going to really want that. And you're going to want to make sure your trust provides for you to be able to get that homestead protection. So that's a reason, hey, let's get an update. Let's make sure your trust is working for both New York and for Florida.
What is I asked you last episode, I ended with, what's the first step for somebody to start an estate plan? What is the first step when someone's like, okay, I'm going to retire, we're going to move to Florida, or even if they're not retired and they're going to move to Florida, what's the first step in getting things rolling?
Sure. So I think if you're thinking about moving to Florida, it's not a bad idea to update your estate plan. Have at least come in for a consultation, see to review your estate plan, because you're hitting a milestone, right? So in estate planning, we tell people, come in let's look at the documents every 5 years. That's kind of like when you go to the mechanic, they tell you, hey, change this oil in 3,000 miles. And then you just look at that sticker above on your car and you're like, wow, that mileage was 5,000 miles ago. I better go change my oil. So we also be able to come in at milestone life events. So retirement is a milestone life event. So it's probably a good idea to come in anyway, right? And then you can discuss, hey, we're thinking about snowbirding. And it might not just be Florida. It might be we're thinking about North Carolina. We're thinking about Tennessee. We're thinking about Arizona. What is that going to do to my estate plan? And it's the same concept, really. You want to have that Arizona house in a trust. Arizona probate isn't any more fun than New York probate. I've never done a probate in Arizona. I've never done a probate in Tennessee. Knock on wood, I never do, because that means I'll take another bar exam, and I don't want to do that. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they're not fun in any state. We want to avoid these in any state. It's not fun. It's not free, and it's not quick in any state. So anywhere you're moving, let's come in and update the documents if need be.
Sounds like great advice. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on Estate Planning with Bernard Law. To connect with Daniel or learn more about protecting your family's future, visit BernardEstatePlan.com. And the book is Estate Planning for Snowbirds. I keep saying snowboard. I live in Colorado, so I keep saying snowboards, but yes, Estate Planning for Snowbirds. You can get it on Amazon or for free if you swing by his office. Daniel, really good having you here again. Thanks so much for your time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.